My name is Steve Duckworth, and I work for Clariant, based in Switzerland, and I'm responsible for what we call healthcare polymer solutions. And by solution, what we talk about here is anything to do with modifying the plastic that goes into pharmaceutical packaging or into medical devices. What I'm going to cover today is very quickly an introduction to who Clariant are and what we have at CPhI, what our focused areas is. I'm going to talk about the protection topic and why it's increasingly important, particularly vis-a-vis the changing regulations that happen. And then I'm going to really lead on from the previous speaker who talked about how to make packaging resistant to fakes, and I'm going to talk along with my colleague here from our partner CPhI about how you can actually do that inside the plastic, and the reasons why will become obvious as we go through the presentation. First of all, Clariant. Clariant is a chemical company, originally coming from Sandoz and Herc's parentage. We are an international company, as you can see. We have four main business areas: care chemicals, catalysts, plastics, coatings, natural resources. And in terms of our involvement with pharmaceuticals and medical devices, you see we have three main areas. The first one is to do with polyethylene glycols for excipients. The second area is to do with moisture and oxygen protection. And then there's my business line, which, as I said, is everything to do with modifying the plastics with colors, with additives to change functionality. These are the areas that my business line is involved with. You can see drug delivery, invasive devices, diagnostics, pharmaceutical packaging. So we cover the whole spectrum of things that you may see at this show. And in particular at this show, one of the things we're talking about here is how we actually support our activities with change control, with the pre-testing of the raw materials that then allow us to make the regulatory declarations that support our customers when they have to make their filings with, like, FDA. And something that's very new is by the end of this year, besides the ISO 10993, US 87 and 88, all our products will be pre-tested to European Pharmacopoeia 3.1 and the new USP 661.1 standard, and also extractable metals to the ICH Q3D. So this is something fairly different from perhaps what's available on the market today. So when we talk about protection, at the stand in Hall 4, you'll see that we're covering basically the whole aspect of starting with APIs and drug production, going through products that help with shelf life stability, and then the final topic is how we actually help protect the patient and make sure that the product that he's using is not a fake. So in API and drug protection, one of the things we are launching at this show is an amide and amine-free antistatic concentrate for using polyethylene films, for example, used in clean rooms. And again, the specific, like all of our products for medical and pharma, pre-tested to these regulations. And this is particularly applicable because the current technologies that are currently used here are now running into problems versus these regulations. And also some of the active ingredients start to lose their food contact status. So here's a solution not only that addresses today's problem, but also addresses the proposed USP 665 chapter for materials that are actually used in the pharmaceutical production. Shelf life stability, my colleagues from the other business line are focused around moisture and oxygen protection. And one of the things they have at this show is an extension of their portfolio that not only reduces the moisture down, but controls it at a specific level. So this is very interesting, for example, for maintaining dose stability for dry powder inhalers, and also for maintaining the integrity of capsules to make sure they're not too brittle, to make sure they don't pick up too much moisture and are sticky. And finally, what we're going to spend some time about is the subject of plastiward. and how real-time authentication and monitoring can help detect fakes, and at the closest point you have to the drug, which is usually the plastic. So why is protection increasingly important? Well, certainly protection is very much under the protection of the patient is very much under the regulator's eye. And if you look at the raft of new legislation that is coming out concerning, for example, drug formulations, concerning the plastic materials which are used in the production of the drug, going through to the plastics used in the packaging, then into future legislation that will look at drug delivery devices, and then guidelines coming out from the FDA about change control and how those impact 510K filings. And then you have the new medical device regulations, which will talk about carcinogens, CMRs, EDs, any device containing greater than 0.1%. And then finally, Falsified Medicines Directive, covering things like serialization, track and trace, but also UDI, Unique Device Identifiers for Medical Device, where that legislation comes in. So, despite all of our efforts to fulfill those regulations, there's one thing that is a big threat. Some of the statistics you see on this, when you look into it, quite horrifying. So 1 in 10 medical devices are fakes. You see there's very interesting reports published by the BBC, which talk about people are dying every day, that talk about fake malarials, anti-malarials. There's lots of statistics, but then the question is, what do you do about it? If you look at pharmaceutical value chain, you'll see that the pharmaceutical value chain is global, it's complex, but very vulnerable. And the people who are making fake medicines are also very sophisticated, and Jan will talk a little bit about how they're actually doing this. Countermeasures, serialization. In the industry, you'll hear a lot about serialization, track and trace. Somebody asked a question of the last speaker, how much is it costing? One of the pharmaceutical companies is on record as saying it's cost them roughly $110 million to equip 65 packaging lines and add in all the IT support that's required to deal with serialization. So it's expensive, but it's a regulatory requirement. But serialization has some strengths, but there's also one fundamental weakness. So serialization allows you to encode a package with a unique identifier. It enables you to track that package through the supply chain ending up at the pharmacy. But the one thing it does not do is tell you whether that package is real or a fake. Some different points of view. Some experts come out with some studies that they've done. So, for example, Mark Davison explains the difference between serialization and about authentication, and very clearly he's saying here serialization does not authenticate. It doesn't tell you whether it's real or fake. PricewaterhouseCoopers, in their Fighting Counterfeit Pharmaceuticals report of this year, describe serialization technology as porous, and at peak effectiveness may only catch 35 to 50% of the fakes. There was a study done recently in the UK which deliberately introduced fake anti-cancer drugs into the supply chain. 56% of those fakes arrived at the point of dispensing. And one of the reasons behind that was the fake had the same barcode, serialization number, as the real, but got there first. So then what it did was to block the real from arriving. So I think serialization is good, but there are some limitations. So I'm going to hand over to Jan, and Jan will talk about Plastiward and the way that we're working together to help address that problem, to give some other options that complement serialization. Jan.
Hello, everyone. So, sorry, I just broke my knee 2 weeks ago. And being here and seeing all these medical devices, being a bit an outsider of this field reminds me of how important it is. So maybe just a few words about CPhI. So CPhI is a company, it's about 80, actually it's 90 years old this year. And it's these two main field of activities. The first one is brand protection. And the second one is banknote. Banknote value, what we call value documents. So passport, IDs, driving license, and so on. So we use our technologies to protect these different products from counterfeiting, copies, alteration, and so on. But today, what we are going to talk about is authentication and anti-counterfeiting, and first our point of view. So you saw already from Steve that actually, the global size of the issue and the complexity of the issue is one of the main challenge for brands to tackle it. And to actually bring clarity in this complexity, there is one study or one science, is simply risk management. If you talk about risk management with insurance company, for example, they actually analyze the data. They have a process to follow that actually brings clarity. They can actually make their business out of this process of risk management. So actually, the first thing that we do is actually we use this process to talk to the brands and say, what do we need to do? What is the size of the issue? Where do you want to act? And what can be done? So risk management is a very powerful tool. And risk managers within the company are often very key partners as well to understand the need and actually the size and how to act on it and benefit from these technologies. Then a robust anti-counterfeiting system will make it harder to fake the product. And it makes it easier to spot a fake and stop it. So what does it mean? It means that actually with the advance in technology, just quality is not enough to see a difference between a fake and genuine one. I mean, we all went into market in some countries and see, okay, I buy this, but I know this is not, it's a fake one, because when you touch it, it doesn't feel right, okay? This is what we experience every day. It's the same thing when we talk about brand protection, about drugs, is when nowadays, when you get a box, the quality of a counterfeit, you don't just visualize it. You need something else to add on to be able to actually go and fight this issue. And this is what we are going to talk about, is this mark that you put on your product to then be able to do your job and fight counterfeiting. And then authentication is a complement to serialization. Serialization on its own, it's not actual authentication. So maybe just a few words is, if I have my badge here, you come to look at me and you say, okay, this is who you are. That's identification. Now, how sure you are that this is me who has got the badge and I don't have the badge from my colleague? That's authentication. You need to ask me for my passport, for my ID to be able to say, okay, this is you. So you need a proof of origin that tells you that this is actually, you are the genuine person holding this badge. Same thing for your product. So now to look at the extent of the issue, and often there is confusion around the supply chain, the value chain, and where counterfeiting happens. And I like to put these two life cycles. One is your life cycle. So it comes from innovation, providing or sourcing raw materials, manufacturing, distribution, and it goes to the point of sales, point of use, if you want. This is what you have. This is what you control. And serialization will help you there. It will track what you are doing here. And if you do serialization for your product, it will probably go from here to here, but you can also track your raw materials. And actually, it's not the subject of this presentation, but actually we help to actually secure your own supply chain on serialization, but also having all the tools to actually secure your raw material sourcing. That goes actually together with Clariant. Now you have the other one, the counterfeiters. What they do, they probably skip the innovation. They don't really need to, they copy. So it's the part and the money you invested in. They probably supply raw material, probably not the same as the one here. Yours are way too expensive for them. They want to make as much money as possible. So some kind of raw materials that look similar. They manufacture, not following all regulation compliance to also bring down the cost as much as possible, even if at the end, it's not probably in their interest to kill people. They are their clients. So anyway, it goes to manufacturing, distribution, and it goes to point of sales. So that's where the true product will meet. And you have patients when you go on online pharmacies or whenever you actually get your drugs, you may have the counterfeit and the genuine one next to each other in hospitals, in pharmacies, whatever, in posts of distribution. So here is the key point. And my experience is that in the past 5 years, a lot of companies have tackled this one here, meaning tackling the online selling of drugs, and it's still now a big issue. But it's almost like dealing with the drug dealers in the street. You stop a website, and 2 days later you have another one. The same people behind are opening a new website. So very interesting. It's very interesting to see also the size of the issue, what's going on here, the quality of the counterfeit or the copies. But this is not the end of the solutions. What you need to do is you need to get and start to get into the distribution channel of these people in the manufacturing. So you need to disturb their supply chain to be able to tackle the issue. And this is what we are talking about here. So to tackle it, what you do is actually you combine material security with digital technologies. And when I say material security, so it could be what we are going to talk here. It's a mark that you put into a plastic that you can detect or authenticate whenever you need in your supply chain. But if you have a multi-layers brand protection, so you may have a label, so you may have something directly on your package, it's something that it could be a QR code if it's secured on your packaging. But what is interesting now with the new technologies is the digitalization of the inspection, meaning that you have tools that helps you go authenticate and report quickly, as quickly as possible, what's going on, and build already a report in the field or in a lab, so actually your legal team, who are actually the best friend of the risk management team, who will be actually go and act with the administration of the countries and go to a judge and be able now to act and close a manufacturing site, warehouse, and so on. So, like we discussed before, I don't want to be too long on this one, but risk management is a process. I just want to go through the steps. So you do an assessment just to visualize the size of the issue. Based on the assessment, you define your needs, what you want to do. When you know what to do, you can design your security system. Which one? Do you want to secure with the labels? Do you want to integrate a tagant into your plastic, what we are going to talk about? So here you design your systems based on your needs. And then you deploy it. And from my experience, working with a company that has been dealing with central banks and administration for over 80 and 90 years, this is probably more than 50% of your success. Technologies, you will have thousands of companies, especially now, coming with whatever tag and marker, secure QR code, and so on. When you deploy it in a supply chain, in the pharma industry, that's where the difference comes. So it's not only that the security, the technology needs to be robust, it's how you operate and how you deploy your security. More than 50% of failure comes from actually leaking of the security solution itself in its application and not being secure in this operation. And finally, you monitor it to be able to actually see and improve your solution when actually you do your job. So Plasteward, and maybe just a few words how it came from. And Plasteward would actually CPhI having a tagant, specialized in security, but not knowing much about plastic. We come from a different field, not going too much about regulation compliance in this field, and Clariant, who is actually the plastic expert in the medical plastic world. And working together, we said, okay, now we have synergies. We bring some technologies, and there's a go-to-market with Clariant to access the market. So it's really the synergies between two players in different fields working together that brings the value of the solution. So in a few words, what is Plasteward? It's a tagant, so it's a proprietary tagant from CPhI. We manufacture it. When it's integrated into the plastic, it's totally invisible. So if people know this different type of taggant that are usually used, it's invisible to laser. So it's only our own devices will be able to actually make a reading of this plastic. And these taggants are actually integrated in the various types of plastic. And this is what Steve will actually follow up later. And then you have the monitoring. So when this device here is actually Bluetooth, and it's in real time monitored to a smartphone or a tablet. And these tools will help you to actually scan the QR code or the UDI if there's one on the labels. It will help you already build the report, so take the pictures of the place, taking the identity of the people working there, and so on. So it's a very useful tool that is connected to this authentication device. And these reports are directly linked to a monitoring or inspection platform at the headquarters. Okay, I'll leave the stage to Steve.
Thank you, Jan. So that describes what Plastic is, and if you want to see it in action, please come to our stand. You can see it. We have a demonstration. But the question is then, how do you take that taggant and how do you implement it into a design? When you integrate it into the design, you need to consider several things. One, which components? So the polymer type, is it combined with colors? Is it accessible? Is it detectable? How removable it is? Any impact on mechanical properties? Any impact on manufacturing equipment? Any regulatory impact? Changes product functionality, process, change in drug or body interactions, and also validation of anti-counterfeit performance. So all of these are things that we typically handle when we start a project and we implement a project. Just as a quick example, a pre-filled syringe. Most of you are very familiar with pre-filled syringes, perhaps a very interesting and growing area for delivery of drugs. 95% of the pre-filled syringes are in fact glass, so already that's the first challenge from a plastics solution, where to integrate it. Some new polymers start to come in. Here's a kind of thought process. So I already said the body tends to be glass, you can't put it in there. Maybe you have to think about something else like a serialization label or some other features. The syringe cap, probably not a good idea because it's easy to take the syringe cap off and replace it onto somebody else's fake device. The lure lock is attached to the glass, so maybe it's a good place. The rubber stopper is inside, a little bit difficult to get access to. The plunger rod could also be another possibility. Again, design features that need to be looked at. From the polymer's perspective, it's not a problem. Plastic has already been tested out in virtually most of the polymers you can care to think about. And we've also screened how Plastic works with all the colors and additives that we have in there. So we know how to formulate. So therefore, other considerations applicable to all applications. First of all, any impact on manufacturing equipment? Does it mean revalidation of process? Any regulatory impact? And then how do you actually validate anti-counterfeit performance in production? So in terms of impact on manufacturing equipment, the good news is no impact. So you're not going to have to readapt your packaging line. You're not going to have you change your manufacturing process. There is no impact. Revalidation of your process, since Plastic is part of something that maybe you already introduce into the plastic by, for example, a color concentrate or compound, it's highly unlikely you're going to have to change that. You're still using the same process. Any regulatory impact? Answer is no. Plastic has already been tested to biocompatibility, and also the EP31 and USP 661.1, and also all the extractable metals you can possibly think about that come under ICH Q3D. So there's no regulatory impact. And finally, how do you validate anti-counterfeit performance? Well, as Jan said, this is a systems approach, and quality control and how to do that is part of what we provide. So we teach the supply chain how to do this. And then in terms of how you actually implement, this is kind of a little roadmap of how you can do it. Jan talked about authentication. There's authentications that can be made at various different steps in the chain. Our objective is to secure the supply chain before it gets to the point of dispensing. So the idea behind this is not to have something in every chemist, because that's what serialization is going to do. But our point is to check whether what's going into the chemist in the first place is real or fake. So, conclusions. Protecting your patients is your mission, it's our mission. And what we try to do is offer solutions that help you protect your product and your patient. I've talked about anti-static concentrate for safety in cleanroom films, moisture protection, and finally, we also offer, as I said, a range of colors and additives which support the regulatory compliance. And finally, Duckwort as a robust in-plastics anti-counterfeiting system. Real-time authentication, giving monitoring, enabling fast countermeasures at the closest point to the drug, and is complementary to a multi-layered approach such as using serialization or tamper-evident labeling on the outside packaging. If you want to know more, there is a seminar, webinar that we run. It's hosted by Medical Plastics News. If you search it, you will find it. The next one is on the 7th of December. And there we go into some more detail, in particular about how you actually implement in a project. Thank you very much.